Good morning, everyone. My name is Derek Turner. I'm the Public Information Officer for Montgomery County Public Schools, and welcome to the inaugural monthly media briefing for Montgomery County Public Schools with Dr. Jack Smith, Superintendent of Schools. Just laying out some ground rules for today. We're going to start with some remarks from Dr. Smith, laying out some of the key issues and topics we're addressing in Montgomery County this month and in the coming months. And then we'll have remarks from Troy Body, the head of our equity unit. And then we'll have time for questions, and we'll take questions until 11 o'clock. And I apologize in advance for the delay. And with no further ado, I'd like to bring Dr. Jack Smith to the podium.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Certainly the circumstances and the traffic right now is a problem, but especially our hearts go out to whoever was involved in the accident and their family and friends, and it's just really heartbreaking when bad things happen. I don't know anything about it except that someone was hit. That's all I know, but it's really tragic and difficult. None of us want to be in that circumstance. I'd like to talk for a minute about some of the things that we're working on. First of all, just some quick back-to-school stats. We have about 163,000 students, and that's pre-K through grade 12. Sometimes you'll see a different number like 158, and you'll say, well, how can it be? Well, that's when we don't count pre-K. And one of the reasons those are both counted is that the state allocates per student kindergarten through 12th grade, and they do block grant funding for kindergarten. So oftentimes they expect us to separate those two out, and it's a budgetary issue in the way that students are counted. We have about 100 students that we're still working with the state to identify if they're in our school system, another school system in Maryland, or in another area of the country. And so that's always a challenge between the October 1st date of enrollment, official enrollment, and then mid-November when all the school systems in the state of Maryland have to have their official enrollment finally determined. And so I think 100 out of 163,000 is actually quite good, and we'll have all of those resolved in the next few weeks. We had 2 new buildings open this year, the Thomas Edison School of Technology and Bayard Rustin Elementary School, just a few blocks from here. And those are beautiful buildings. I invite you to make an appointment with Derek and go visit them, especially the Thomas Edison School, which I think signals to our community how schools are going to continue to evolve in the future. And we had a grand opening for that school on October 10th, and we welcomed literally hundreds and hundreds of families, students, and community members, business leaders in the community, governmental leaders. It's just, I think, a wonderful opportunity to both, in very real way, because it will serve thousands of students. It's serving just under 900 students right now this year. But over the coming years, it'll serve thousands of students. It's also the hub for all of our career and technology programs across the entire county. And it's also the first step as we are replacing Seneca Valley High School in Germantown of adding another hub there so that in 2 years when Seneca Valley High School opens, we will actually have 2 centers that offer 16, 17, 18 major programs, as well as programs across every part of the county in IT, in law enforcement, in fire science, in teacher academies, in pure mathematics here at Montgomery College. So lots and lots of different kinds of opportunities have been created, and many of those opened this year for the first time. Montgomery County has had a long history of really strong programs in this area, but we want to expand and build on those programs. And as Daniel Pink said, we want to prepare students for their future, not our past. And so we have to look at what the emerging trends are in the labor market and in education and in opportunity, and then help students prepare, and they choose. We don't choose for them, they choose. We always want to say to them, you can do this, we can help. What is it you want to do? So part of that Thomas Edison School is Finance Park. It had its grand opening day before yesterday, Tuesday afternoon. That was the 16th of October. And that's a truly amazing place. It's the second finance park in the state and the third one in the region. And there are only 3, I think if I understood Ed Grenier, the leader of junior achievement, there are only 3 in the country. And Finance Park is essentially a simulation that we will provide an opportunity for a full day experience for every 7th grader in this county. And what will happen is they will do several weeks of lessons around financial literacy, personal budgets, tying it to career and job aspirations. And then they will go in groups to Finance Park. And what happens essentially is they go into a little auditorium space. They get to hear from some of the people there, and then they open the doors of that auditorium space, and what they see in front of them is a town. And on their device, a phone or the iPad, the tablet we give them, they walk around and they have an identity, and they buy health insurance. They buy life insurance. They pay for their car payment. They rent or buy a home. They figure out all the costs of life on the tablet, and that identity might be you're a 40-year-old man with 3 children. You're a 22-year-old young woman who's going to the local college. And this is your income. And then those expenses build. And then about halfway through the several-hour experience, they start throwing curveballs at them. You just had a major car repair for $2,000. You just lost your job. What are you going to do? What's your savings? And so they have a very real-life experience, which is the first step in a series of progressions in 7th, 8th, and into high school around understanding how our education, our finances, and our personal economic circumstance and our career all fit together. And so we're very excited about that. We want to thank, of course, the state and local government for the new building, which houses Finance Park on the 4th floor of Thomas Edison School of Technology. We want to thank our business leaders for tremendous backing and support of that. And we also want to celebrate that and make sure everyone knows that every 7th grader will have that opportunity in Montgomery County this year going forward. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month in MCPS. We want to call attention to that. A lot of our effort last year and this year, and will be always going forward, will be around the physical, social, and psychological well-being of our students. Because we know when they're physically, socially, and psychologically well and things are working for them, that they're more ready to learn. They're more ready to learn math and reading. They're more ready to do physical education. They're more ready to do social studies and science and all of the other disciplines that we provide, language study. So a lot of attention's been called to it in the system. We've done an audit across the entire system of all of our schools, what they're doing in each of those areas, and now we're looking at how to be more methodical and more systematic to make sure that we're reaching students, whether it's an issue like substance abuse, or it's an issue like bullying, it's an issue of physical fitness, it's an issue of a sense of belonging that students do or don't have, or it's an issue of mental health and wellness. We want to make sure that we have called attention to it, and either we're providing the service, or in many cases, we're bridging to good agencies and good opportunities in the community when that's necessary for students' mental health and well-being. So that's a very important effort. Another thing that we're trying to do each month is really focus on an area of our work. The work goes on all the time, but we want to give people information about it. This month we're talking about celebrating diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we also have to talk about inclusion and equity. Diversity talks about who we are. Inclusion talks about how we come together, and equity talks about how we all get the opportunities and access that we need to move ahead in our lives and make the choices we want to make. We do a great deal of work in that area in the community, and every community needs to. It doesn't matter, large or small. It doesn't matter what the economic level or racial makeup, cultural makeup. Every community ought to be talking about who we are, how we come together, and how we provide equitable opportunity and advancement for every student. It's critical for the economic well-being, it's critical for the social and psychological well-being, and it's critical for the sustainability of our communities. And so it's an area of real intense focus last year, this year, every year going forward, and an area that we want to work on so that we make sure that our students, our teachers, our families really understand everything that's available to them, and they can take full advantage of it, and they have the sense that they belong, that no matter what the program, the class, the activity, they belong and they have full access and full opportunity to it. And one of the people that does a great deal of that work in our school system is Troy Body, and he's here to share a few remarks with that, and then we'll open it up for questions. Troy.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Good morning, everyone. I'm Troy Body, the Director of Equity Initiatives, and I just wanted to take a minute just to share a couple of the ways in which we promote equity so that every student in the system feels included and has equitable outcomes. So this has been part of our ongoing work in Montgomery County since about 2005. We always tell people it's not a checklist. This is work that we are always working on because culture changes and evolves. And so one of the things we've done last year was to do system-wide training. We've done a lot of training where we had people come in and take advantage of the different learning opportunities, but last year we took it system-wide. And so every employee had to engage in learning around cultural proficiency and implicit bias. And this training went out in the in the fall, and then later in the spring. This year, some of our work is to continue to build upon that, and we're going to introduce a session called Interrupting Implicit Bias, because the first one kind of gave an overview of what it was. This year, we're going to talk about, what do we do about it now that we know what it is? And that way, we can hold everybody accountable for doing the work that really creates inclusive environments for students. One of the other new things that we're doing this year is creating a newsletter called Equity Matters, and each month we focus on a different topic to, again, build awareness. We like to have multiple entry points for staff so that wherever you are, we're here to meet you and to help you grow. And we also take it as an opportunity to highlight what our schools are doing in order to really create these inclusive spaces for students. So I'm continue to be excited about the work. I'm continually excited about working with offices, the community, and schools in order to create that environment where every student has an opportunity and outcomes that allow them to do whatever it is they choose to do when they graduate from us. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. The last comment I would make is that on November 1st, we're going to have a ribbon cutting at the McDonald Knowles School. That is a school that MCPS was no longer using as a school, that we reopened this year as a pre-K, an early learning center. And it's particularly interesting because, once again, we're signaling toward the future, what things may and can look like. We don't have enough space and for all of the students in this county to be in pre-K in schools. And there are many, many private pre-K providers who do terrific work. So as this state talks about pre-K, especially with the Kirwan Commission and the upcoming General Assembly session and the local government's interest in this, we have to think of new and different ways to create opportunities for early learning for every child. And so reopening the McDonald Knowles Center gives us a pre-K site where we can serve about 100 students, along with partners who do other work in early learning for both students receiving regular general education curriculum as well as students receiving special education curriculum. So on November 1st, if you're interested and available, we'd love to have you come to McDonald Knowles, because we think that's a next step as we move into the future and think, how do we get to every student? Because in our community and in our state, all must mean all. We must reach every student and give them a really strong first good step after high school into adult life. So I'll stop there and turn it back to Mr. Turner, and he can direct us as to how we're going to do this.
Great, we'll start taking questions. If you just raise your hand, we'll just go around robin. There's a microphone behind you if you want to use that.
Sure. Thank you. Neil Augenstein with WTOP. In April, you folks implemented some new child abuse and neglect procedures. I'd like to get a sense of how it's going this year.
And do you have a specific procedure you're interested in, or can we talk generally about the work we've been doing?
Just talking in general about whether, essentially whether there have been reports this school year and how the process is working in dealing with those reports.
Absolutely. We have reports every day. The vast majority of those reports are not about our employees. They're about members of our community, tragically and sadly, but it's true. And we have a legal and a moral obligation to continue that process and make sure those reports get to the right people in the right agencies. And we do that consistently. When there is a report about someone who is employed by us, we are quick to respond and to remove the person from that circumstance while we do all that reporting. Once that reporting is done, we step back to a large degree and let the police and the Child Protective Services do their work. We simultaneously look at what they provide to us and think about it, and then we ultimately take action as necessary and appropriate. I would say it's really important to remember that we do background checks, we do fingerprinting, and nothing ever shows up unless someone's committed some crime that they've been caught for. So while we know what their background is, we don't know what's in the hearts and minds of people. But as I said, the vast majority of those reports are for members of our community being reported by children and others to us, and then we take that right away to Child Protective Services.
And just to follow up, have there been cases this year in which an employee or a contractor or a volunteer has been accused, and sort of give me a sense of how that is being addressed?
Yes, there have been cases this year where someone's been accused, and as I said, we work with law enforcement and child protective folks, and they'll either come back and say there's nothing here, or we have suspicions but nothing verifiable, or child abuse did occur. If they come back and say anything other than there's nothing here, then we continue down the process of progressive discipline, investigation, and ultimately some action up to and including termination if indeed the information shows that. And we have a higher standard than law enforcement does for this. So while there may be nothing that will be done in law enforcement, we still always look into it.
So, of course, there was another pedestrian incident today, and, a week ago there was the incident on Georgia Avenue. I believe there's a 15-year-old who's still hospitalized recovering from that, and that's something that the council's talked about. That's become the big thing. Is there anything new in terms of strategies, crossing guards, implementing this or that the school is looking at now that that issue has struck, obviously so close to home with what happened with the Kennedy students, that can be done to prevent this moving forward?
Absolutely, very, very important question. One that strikes the fear in the heart of anyone with children and really any of us, because we all have loved ones, friends and family, and the thought that they would be hit by a car is just really horrifying. Yes, we do have something. We're working with the county government on Vision Zero, the Vision Zero plan, and how we will work with that. We do safe routes to school. We also had National Walk to School Day last week, where we really emphasized, and we're going to continue to emphasize this year with children, use crosswalks. And one of our hopes and our goals in that effort to teach children explicitly about using crosswalks is exactly what happened with littering in this country 40 years ago. They tried to teach the adults not to litter. It didn't work, so we taught the kids not to litter. And they taught their parents and the other adults in their lives not to litter. And we have gone from when I was a child, a very littered society to one that's just always cleaner. Now there's some litter, but nothing like there was when I was a kid. And so our goal is to get to every single elementary child this year with really explicit instruction around using crosswalks, and then hope that grows up with them and also permeates and becomes pervasive through families, as well as working with the state. We'll continue to talk to the county government. We're not the people who can change that, but we can be a really good partner around our 206 schools and our 20 or so facilities to do whatever we can do to make that safer for everyone.
As a follow-up on that, the county has said that a lot of these roads where they have a problem are state roads, and they have a hard time breaking through the state bureaucracy. Georgia Avenue, for example. Inasmuch as the school system has a connection with a state agency, is there any greater role you can play in terms of trying to get transportation folks to take pedestrian safety more seriously?
Those are conversations that we've actually been having in the last few months. And of course, the accident on George Avenue, as well as several other accidents in the community, none that were as serious but really concerning, have spurred us on. So I've actually had some conversations with our colleagues at the county government about things we can do together to encourage the state to make changes that we see locally are needed. And so we're going to pursue that as we move through the next couple of months.
Could you give a few examples of what you can do?
Well, some things we do specifically, even though a group of students in a neighborhood or apartment complex might live within the radius of the walkers for a school, we provide buses. That's one thing we do right now. We probably need to look at more of that. Another thing we can do is write joint letters and do joint testimony to the General Assembly and to the state highway agencies about speed limits. Another thing I'll just tell you right now that ought to be changed right now is the fine for people who pass school buses. I'm sorry, $250 for a blatant action. There is no way that you pass a school bus when the arm is down and all the red lights are on by accident. Now, I know sometimes people are confused by that law, but the law is very clear. If there is no barrier, no Jersey wall, no median, nothing, it doesn't matter if the road is 2 lanes, 3 lanes, 4 lanes, 5 lanes. If there's not a barrier in the middle of it, they need to stop both directions for that school bus. And I think that law should be changed, and I advocate all the time for that to be changed. So there are a lot of things we can do, and I think we have to, as a community, with the school system very involved in that activity, advocate with the state and the local governments to change some of the things that we do right now. Those are a few of the ways we've been thinking about it and working on it.
Questions?
Yeah, just real quick. Over the summer, other counties like Baltimore had a lot of issues regarding heat, and I believe there was a brief small issue with the heat over summer at a school here. Is there anything looking towards the winter to make sure all the schools can be properly heated as winter is just around the corner?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. We actually had almost no disruption the first week of school. We had to let one school out early, and then another school was let out early when the entire neighborhood went down. Had nothing to do with the school or our equipment. So other than that, we were able to maintain school even though the temperature unfortunately was up in the 90s and hundreds that first week of school. We have begun that process of switching over. I'm so thankful that you asked this question. From air conditioning to heat, we've already begun the process. We spent September and early October testing everything we have to make sure it works. And now that takes about 2 weeks, maybe into 3 weeks to switch those over. And I would just say, you probably all know this because you've been involved in these conversations, but many of our families don't understand this is not the same as going to the thermostat on your wall and clicking it to heat. You actually, when you do boilers, and whether it's geothermal or other kinds of technologies, you have to switch over whole systems. But we do a great deal of testing ahead of time. And, a week or so ago when we first started doing this, I said to our operations people, did you check the weather report before you started this? Because I don't want any 90-degree days the week after you get it done. And so they looked at the long-term weather report, and it's somewhat of a estimation game and looking at everything. But yeah, we have to do a lot of things, and one of the reasons that we don't always or often end up with this circumstance is that there's a lot of systems in place, and we want to constantly be upgrading those systems to make sure we're doing the testing and thinking about, okay, it's a month until it could be 40 degrees outside or 35 degrees outside. What do we need to be doing 1 month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks ahead of time to make sure that doesn't happen? And that kind of systems thinking has been a part of the school system for a long time, but you don't have to be sick to get better. We can constantly be looking at those systems and make them better.
For easily 20 years, Montgomery County Public Schools has been concerned about the achievement gap.
Mm-hmm.
You came on board saying that you had some ideas on what you could do to try to improve that. Can you give us an update on what exactly you have implemented and what kind of results have people seen?
Sure. This is not something that's going to change overnight, It's not. But that being said, we shouldn't have a 10-year plan. We should have a 2 or 3 year plan. So let me give you some examples of ways we're thinking about this and actually doing the work. People say, well, stop thinking and doing the work. No, we want to think and really think and plan carefully, but then we got to start the work right away. So some examples of this. We've been looking at our use of accelerated math in the elementary school and really examining our practices around that and why we recommend some children to go into it and some not. And we've expanded the number of children to go into it, and they're seeing success. That will bear fruit then in their achievement and learning levels and the progress they make. Another area that we've worked in is middle school, again in mathematics. And I'll give you a statistic, and Derek can send you the actual numbers if you want them, or you can use mine because they're really close. A little over 5,000 students successfully completed Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade in 2016. So 2 years ago in June, a little over 5,000. This June, 2018, a little over 8,000 students successfully completed Algebra 1 by the end of 8th grade. That gives them open access to high school science, mathematics, STEM, computer science in a way they didn't have it before. And when I say successfully completed, I'm not just talking about their grade, I'm also talking about their successful achievement to meet the state high school graduation requirement on the PARCC exam. So they not only met the credit requirement for high school Algebra 1, but they also met the high school graduation requirement for Algebra 1. And I think that's really significant. Then another area where we've been working is across 10 of our schools the past 2 years. This year we're adding 8 more. We're doing something called providing equal opportunity school systems. And equal opportunity schools is not a program. It's not a recipe. You don't go in and plug something in. But what you go in and do is work closely. And we have a consultant who works with this. It came out of Stanford University. You work with the adults in the school and you work with the students in the school. And you work first separately and then together. And what you do is say to students, why aren't you in advanced placement? Why aren't you in the most rigorous program in English? Why aren't you pursuing, your interest in social studies in college prep social studies classes? You ask them that question. Then you ask the adults, why aren't students, especially students who are identified as in poverty or students of color, are not in these programs to the greatest degree that white and Asian students not in poverty are. So you ask them that. What you hear from the students is, I don't belong, I don't fit in, I think that I wouldn't be successful. What you hear from adults is, well, they have to work hard. If they want to come, they have to do all their homework. It's hard. And when we get the adults and students to talk to each other, what we've seen are some pretty significant enrollment increases in those programs. So as we support students in elementary, middle, and high school, and this is just in mathematics, which is the foundation for all hard science, computer science, engineering, all of those things, we're seeing some good results all the way from our early elementary through graduation, and we're going to continue those efforts. But that sense of belonging, I was just at a University of Shady Grove Board of Advisors meeting this morning, and I shared about that. We can build all the things we want, but if we don't create in kids a sense that I belong there, I can do this, I'm part of this, this matters in my life, then they're not going to take advantage of it. So we're really focusing on those things too, which marries beautifully with physical, social, and psychological well-being, because part of your well-being is what Troy talked about, which is equity and implicit bias. Part of it is, can I actually do the math? Part of it is, how does my teacher talk to me about my performance? All those things fit together. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes. So I guess my final question is, to my understanding, this is this kind of new format and this new level of availability. Is this kind of just something that was wanted, that the MCPS wanted to begin this year as kind of new level of transparency and reaching out? I just want to kind of get into what's the motivation, because my understanding is this is kind of a new thing that you're granting us with this being the start of it.
Actually, when I came in to this position a little over 2 years ago, and Derek came into his position at the same time, we spent a lot of time building systems. And first we had to build internal systems. And then middle of last year or last spring sometime, we started talking about how do we give more information to our community? Good information, but accurate. Not so good information, but making progress, or difficult, hard information. Because when 1 million residents, 163,000 kids come together in 206 schools, you're going to have every kind of information. So we started thinking about this. We talked about it this summer and worked on it and said, you know what? We'll make ourselves available. We'll give the information that we think is critically important, and then we'll provide the media the chance to ask the questions that they think are important, because all of it is important to our families, our students, and our community, and it's part of what we ought to be doing. And so it is an effort to reach out, and it's one of the things we're pushing on our whole school system to do. You know, we do a lot of, it's on the website, we're having a meeting, all those sorts of things. Well, we want to do more than it's on the website. We'll put it on the website, but we actually want to find ways to get it into all the different communities we serve. We actually want people to go into communities and have meetings instead of saying, come to us, we'll come to you. So this is a we'll come to you effort.
Can you tell us a little bit about your evidence of learning, that approach to?
Absolutely. So 2 years ago when I came, what I found was a tremendous amount of data, but it was disparate data, and you couldn't really pull it together easily digitally, or you couldn't pull it together easily and manipulate the data. So if I wanted to look at something, I literally had to have, 6 spreadsheets on the table in my office and trying to say, okay, this number of students are in Algebra 1 in this school, and this number of students are in Algebra 1 in 7th grade, and what's the demographic makeup of those students, all of those things. So we started building a system to say, what are the things we want to live by? And one of the things we want to live by is we don't want to depend on one test to tell us how we're doing. I am a supporter of the state test. I think it's a tremendous equity tool. Is the PARCC test as good as it should be? No. Is it better than all the tests that have come before it? Yes. So I'm hoping in the next iteration of it, in the spring of 2020, that they will make it more adaptive, more shorter, it will fit better in periods. But the data from that is a tremendous equity tool. But we don't want to just say, you're doing well or you're not doing well based on that one experience. So we looked at all the things we were already doing and said, if you can meet multiple measures in this, then we'll have a better sense of how you're doing. So if you look at classroom measures like teacher grades and projects and quizzes, if you look at district measures like the MAP test, which the system has used for more than a decade, and then if you look at the state test, ACT, SAT, AP, college career ready tests, if you look at all those things, if a student meets any 2 out of those 3 things, a classroom measure and a state measure, a district measure and an external measure, then we can say that that student is ready at the end of 2nd grade. So we've developed that system, and I've reported now twice to the board on how we're doing. And it won't surprise you to hear we're doing better in literacy, reading and writing, than we are in mathematics, as everyone in the state and nation is, almost without exception. And now the next step is to look at what's the impact of the school. So we can look at the whole elementary system, we can look at the whole middle school system, the whole high school system, but what's happening at specific schools? So I have shown the board at board meetings, and all this is available publicly, that we're going to continue to always monitor how our white and Asian students are doing who are not in poverty. And we're really going to focus on and measure how 5 subgroups of students are going to do. African American students in poverty, African American students not in poverty, Hispanic students in poverty, Hispanic students not in poverty, and all other students of all races and cultures identified in poverty. That's where the disparities exist. That's when people talk about gaps in achievement, gaps in opportunity, gaps in access. That's where that exists. And so we're going to use the evidence of learning and that 2 out of 3 measure methodology and that those multiple measures, then to look at the impact of our schools, and we're developing that right now. And we're going to look at performance or achievement. We're going to look at progress over time. We're going to look at equity and culture in the school, and we're going to look at what that school's priority area is. And so this is the work we've been doing. So the real work is in the classroom. The real work is in the school building, always. But how do school people know what's happened? And I'll give you one small statistic and then I'll stop. This year, because of the systems we've built, we were able to identify that just under 200 ninth graders had gotten a 4 or a 5 on the PARCC test in mathematics, but they were repeating Algebra 1. That does not make sense. If you get a 4 or 5 on the Algebra 1 PARCC test, and I would invite all of us to take it together and see how we do, you're doing really, really well in mathematics. So why would we ask the student to repeat that course? Because they know Algebra 1. That's good evidence. And so we have to think that way and use the data and information to change the experience of students in schools so they walk out the door with a diploma and really good first opportunities after graduation.
Excuse me, I believe that one of the notices that came out said that this was going to be an 11 o'clock availability. So
I apologize for that. I wasn't aware that
we arrived early for 11, but late for your start.
Okay.
So I apologize in advance. If you've covered any of these, I therefore apologize. Can you tell us how the condom distribution program is going in the schools and if there's any parental pushback?
Sure. So one of our board members and county council members sent a letter saying that they thought this ought to happen, and the board agreed. And what essentially happened now is, rather than just in our 4 wellness centers at 4 high schools, all of the nursing stations, which are run by Health and Human Services in all 25 high schools, as well as all our alternative pathway locations, all those nursing stations, Health and Human Services nurses, have that information and the condoms and everything they need to counsel students, work with them, and talk to them about it, and provide that to the students for protection around sexually transmitted infections. And so far, there have been parents who have pushed back some and said, we don't think you should do this. We've got other parents who said, well, I'm not opposed to it happening, but I wish there had been more time. And, I'm not in charge of time. I'm hired to administer the school system. And they talked to me about the difference between October 1st and October 15th at the board meeting. And I said October 1st is fine. So we developed an MOU with the health department. It says that a student goes in, sits down with the health professional. They have a very private conversation. There's no record kept of the student's name by us. It's only with the health professionals, the health department. And whatever happens in their conversation is between the health professional and the student. And so that is happening across all of the high schools and alternative pathway programs we have for high schools.
Over the course of the summer, there were some questions about the quality of water at the schools, and it was being addressed. Can you update us on where that stands and looking forward if there's more remediation or improvement that's needed or repairs that are needed?
Sure. And the first thing I'll say is we met the state requirement last spring that we had to test all of our facilities. We did that. We did find some outlets that we had to immediately turn off or remove. Many of them weren't places people would drink. We still turned them off and or remove them, like out of a lab sink in a science room, those sorts of things. And we'll continue that process. What we don't want to do is think of this as a one-time deal. It's got to be an ongoing preventative effort. One of the things the board has been talking about is the level that's acceptable. What is the level? Is it 20? Is it 15? Is it 10? Is it 0? And different school systems have done different things. Derek can get you all the specifics so you can look at that and what the levels are and the number of, relatively speaking, it's a small number of outlets that had to be removed or turned off. but one is too many. We want it turned off. And we've also cooperated with the health department, and they very well with us around any parent that had any concerns about their child. So we've been very proactive in this area, but it's an area that we're never going to have to stop working on, ever.
I may have another question if you would share the microphone.
Okay.
Good morning. Again, sorry if you covered this already, but was there any decision or at least discussion about these excused absences for students who want to be involved in any sort of protests?
That policy will come again for discussion and adoption, I believe, on November 13th. Derek can get it to you for sure. I think my date is right, though, and they will continue to look at how that will be done. You know, I think all of us are in favor of students having a voice and having an opportunity to express themselves. Is what this country's based on, is the idea that I get to participate in this democracy. How that's done and how we keep students safe and how we are responsible to their parents and families, different question. And so we'll continue to look at that, and once the board decides specifically what the policy is, it'll be the job of the staff working with me to decide the interpretation of that, and then ultimately the administration of it, how it will be implemented to make sure kids are safe.
Okay, so earliest would be next month.
November 13th, I think, is the board meeting where it will come up again, and I'll have more information then.
Thank you.
I don't know now what they're going to decide, but we'll see.
Any thought given to spring break expanding from 6 days to 10 days, and any thought given to the possibility of eliminating the Jewish high holidays as days off school?
We actually did a survey of our community where we had profound response, and the board saw this a week or so ago at their board meeting. And so there are two scenarios out there for next year. Both of them include the Jewish holidays in terms of the schools being closed. And one of them includes a full spring break, and one of them includes a partial week spring break. The reason for us is very clear. We're not opposed to or in favor of any particular religion. Ours is purely operational. How can we operate schools given the number of people that participate in different activities based on their faith or their culture during the year? So if you take a look at that survey information, Derek can send you the PowerPoint, which is really quite illuminating. It'll tell you that what the board will decide about this year. Of course, it's a partial week spring break. A year from now, I don't have any sense of what they're going to decide about that. With scenario 1 or 2, they're very similar, but that is one distinction in them.
And the last question from our Silverchips reporter.
Hello, I'm Jasmine.
Hi.
I'm a reporter. I'm representing Silverchips newspaper, specifically the Latino community for Blair. So my question is, how is MCPS attempting to include and integrate ESOL students into the general public? Or in other words, what initiatives does MCPS plan to enact this school year for ESOL students?
Well, when we say ESOL students, just like when we say any other group of students, we're talking about a vast number of very unique individual people. And so I always want to preference, when we say, well, our female students or our boy students, you're talking about tens of thousands of people. With ESOL students, we're talking about 35,000 students, including those who've just recently exited, as well as the ones who are getting direct service right now. And so when we think about that, we have to think about a whole continuum of services. So we have students who actually go to school during the day or at night in a program called CREA, because they arrived here, at age 15, 16, 17, and actually completing the high school pathway and getting all the credits in the typical way, as you are doing, isn't going to be possible for them. So what we say is, how do we create opportunity for students? Now, sometimes it depends on their level of English when they get here, because you can be an ESOL student and have a pretty good foundation, or you can be an ESOL student and have no background at all in English. And so it just all depends on that. But if they don't have the background and they don't have the academic, we give career education, and we give English language education that will be most useful for them in the community and in the job market. A whole bunch of our students start in kindergarten. Almost entirely they exit ESOL programs before the 6th grade. almost without exception. So we have all these ESOL students that are walking around our high schools, and no one ever knows they were an ESOL student by the time they're in middle school or high school because they've already left it. And so it's that effort to find that continuum. But some of the ways we're thinking about that is looking at, I was talking about accelerated math earlier. I talked about those 3 examples, elementary, middle, and high school. Nothing about your language should prevent you from doing the most accelerated math you can do. Nothing about your language should prevent you from participating in the most accelerated or the most interesting programs to you, whether it's a career program, an academic subject, all those things. And we're building and we're creating more. I won't say building, we're creating more dual immersion schools so that we can take the language of different groups of kids and put them together and provide the instruction in both languages, which is a tremendous benefit to all students in that school then, not just students who are in a one-way immersion program. We're going to strengthen and increase the number of language programs in middle school and in high school across the system. So whether we're offering AP Spanish or AP French to speakers of those languages or to English speakers, because we want everybody to be a speaker of all languages that are available to them, because language is an asset. And I think that's the biggest change that we're making, is the idea that language is an asset. Whatever you bring with you is an asset, and we want to build on that so that you have that for your future. And the most exciting thing is the seal of biliteracy that students can earn when they graduate. It's on their diploma, it's on their transcript. And what it says is this student is fully biliterate or multiliterate in 2 or more languages. And that's a tremendous asset to be able to say, I read, write, and speak at a very high level more than one language. That will help us in college, in our career, in our community, everywhere. So a lot of attention being paid to that right now. One statistic I'll give you is the first year they had the seal of biliteracy was the class of 2017. Class of 2017, there were a little over 1,200 seals granted in the state of Maryland. We had almost 1,200 of them. We had all but about 100. This past year, same thing, only more students from this past year. It went up into the 1,600s, I think, of high school seniors who walked out with it. This year's seniors who just walked in the door, they're already at the 2017 level, and we haven't added any of the experiences that will be shown in the 12th grade that will add more. So I think we're going to exceed this number every year, and there's no reason we cannot get to half of our graduates receiving the seal of biliteracy in the next 4 or 5 years. And that changes the whole idea of what ESOL is, because it becomes asset-based instead of something I have to get over, because we don't want kids to get over it. We want them to build their language skills everywhere.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming today.